that 28 Years Later is officially out, guys, I wanted to make a spoiler review going over the entire movie, as well as just opening up a general discussion as to the many different directions this one takes and where it could lead to going into the next two movies. So there is your warning now. Let's get into it. The movie starts off with that sequence you see in the trailer where you just see all these kids watching Teletubbies, and then just out of nowhere they get obliterated by all these infected. And somehow this kid named Jimmy is able to escape and run over to his dad's church, where he sees his dad praying on the ground, essentially saying that all these infected are his children. He is a lunatic, by the way. He's just lost it, and this is all like a really good thing, and he should be happy and proud. Jimmy's all like,
what?
So then he takes his dad's cross, he gets into a little crawl space to save himself, and he just watches his dad just get obliterated by all these infected, and then we get the 28 Years Later title card. And finally, we make it to our main plot line where we follow Jamie, played by Aaron Taylor Johnson, as he goes across this little road type thing to the mainland with his son Spike, played by Ralph Williams, to do a little infected hunting. And also the town locals are just like, hey, I just want to let you guys know you are on your own when you leave this. If you make it back, we'll open up the doors and we'll let you back in, but nobody's coming to save you if things go awry. And also, there is a very specific time that you have to go on this road because the tide obviously heightens. So if you do even want to make it back, you do have to arrive back on this road at a very specific time. Otherwise, you're pretty much screwed. So Jamie and Spike finally make it to the mainland, where we're introduced to our new type of infected, which are these giant, hulking, fat, really slow crawling type of infected that seem to be no threat whatsoever. So they do a little bit of hunting, and then they start walking around, exploring a little bit, and that's when they come across this dilapidated building with the words Jimmy written on the side of it. You may be asking yourself who Jimmy is. Is he that kid from the very beginning? Nobody really knows, but they go inside, and this is the scene that you see in the trailer where you see the guy pretty much strung upside down with the words Jimmy carved into his stomach from what appears to be a knife. And Spike asks the obvious question, why is this infected tied upside down? How does that make any sense? Or how does that even happen? To which Jamie later on responds by basically implying that there are worse things on this island than just the infected. So anyways, they put an arrow through Jimmy because he starts wigging out or whatever, so they go out into the mainland, and then off in the distance by this tree, they see another new type of infected called alphas. And alphas are these giant, hulking, 7-foot-tall caveman type of characters that are essentially the leaders to the infected that me and you know from the 28 Days Later franchise, the ones that pretty much run and bolt at you. So when they say go and attack something, they go and attack. And apart from this being my favorite sequence in the entire movie because it's just so suspenseful and it's just shot so beautifully, I'm just sitting there thinking to myself, Danny Boyle, when he was creating these alpha characters, was he just thinking when he was completely done, he was just like, you know what? We need to add one more thing. Let's add a giant elephant trunk on the front of them because why not? They got really big cocks, and it's very evident in a lot of scenes, and it's almost just like purposely shot. So yeah, that's what I'm saying. So Jamie and Spike start hauling ass back to the dilapidated Jimmy building, but in the process, they start shooting their arrows at these infected that are chasing them. And I want to make mention of this sequence really quick too, because when the infected actually get hit by the arrows, Danny Boyle shot it in a way where it's just like this, 360, stop motion point of view. So when the arrow comes in, it's just, even though that it's unique, it's probably one of the most uninteresting off-kilter death sequences I've ever seen in a movie ever. What do you want me to say? So at this point, Jamie and Spike hunker down in the attic of this Jimmy building, and they are essentially just waiting for the tide to lower so they can book it onto the main road back to their village. And that's when Spike notices a giant bonfire off in the distance, to which he asks his dad, hey, what is that? What's going on there? Is that like a campsite, or are there survivors or whatnot that need help? To which Jamie reluctantly and very weirdly says, I don't really know what that is. But something tells me he definitely knows what that is. But the time comes and Spike and Jamie start hauling ass on the road back to the main village, and that is when they notice a giant hulking alpha chasing right after them. And he is catching up really quick too, because I'm assuming the gravitational force of his giant cock is giving him all this speed. But thankfully the townspeople, they end up saving the day. They end up pelting this alpha with like 10 different arrows and a giant flaming harpoon gun. That's what all it takes to take him out. It's just like insane. But anyways, they let him inside, and the whole town gets together and has this giant party for the both of them. Now, during the party sequence, we watch a very interesting character study with Jamie and Spike's characters both. Because the dad, Jamie, would rather fabricate this story in front of everyone about how his son took out all these infected and took out an alpha and all that stuff, fabricating it all just to make them look good, whereas Spike would rather go back to his house and attend to his sick and dying mother, Isla, played by Jodie Comer. But on his way back to his house, Spike notices off in the distance his dad, Jamie, getting it on with one of the town locals, inevitably just cheating on his wife. That pisses Spike off, and he starts to resent his father. So when Jamie finally arrives back to his house, he is then confronted by his son Spike, who asks him a ton of questions like, do you know what's happening with mom? Do you know if she's dying or not? Are you going to get married to this new girl? And then he also asks him, why is it that you didn't tell me that bonfire that I seen previously was actually a doctor who could potentially help my mom? At this point, Jamie explained to his son that when he was younger, he was out exploring with some friends, and that's when they came across the doctor played by Ralph Fiennes, and he had just hundreds of bodies lined up and in front of this giant bonfire, and the doctor had noticed them, and he was just like, hey, waving to him like an everyday neighbor or whatnot. So it scared him so bad that they end up leaving and they never went back. But Spike doesn't care about any of that. He ends up taking his mother and sneaking out of their village and onto the main road, onto the mainland, in search of this doctor to potentially help his sick and dying mother. On their way there, they come across this soldier by the name of Eric, who, lack of better words, is kind of like the comedic value of the movie in a way. He explains that his ship ended up sinking, which kind of forced him onto this village or island, if you want to call it that. And he explains to the rest of the party that, this whole island is pretty much quarantined off from the rest of the world because of the infected. Now, fast forwarding just a little bit, this is when the mother Isla is a little bit ahead of the group, and she notices on this bus that there is this infected woman that is currently giving or trying to give birth. And at this point in time, you think there is a general situation happening in front of you where the infected will respond to kind gestures and not try to, eat you and whatnot when Isla tries to help her deliver her baby. But thankfully, the delivery goes good, and for the most part, from my understanding, the baby doesn't look infected whatsoever, and everything seems to be pretty kosher. That is, until the infected woman comes out of nowhere and absolutely does not respond to kind gestures and tries to eat them all, and then Eric ends up, putting a bunch of bullets in her head. And at this point, Eric starts freaking out, and he's just like, hey, you and I both know what that is. That's a zombie baby. And the rest of the party, they're just like, no, it's actually pretty healthy looking, and we're going to keep it. And then Eric starts freaking out, and that's just out of nowhere, an alpha comes, and they have this ability. It's almost like a Mortal Kombat ability where they take their head and clean off, and the spine comes with it. And that's what happens with Eric, and what I'm essentially saying is he's no longer living. So the family starts hauling ass off of this train as this alpha tries to come and try to eat them and whatnot, and that's when the doctor shoots the alpha with this paralyzing dart, which pretty much immobilizes him. That's when we're essentially, introduced to the doctor. We follow the doctor back to his place, and that's when we're introduced to the giant bone temple, and that's when he explains that, just because someone's infected or someone passes away or whatnot, they have thoughts, they had ideas, they had memories, they had a consciousness at one point in time. So he takes them, burns them, takes their skulls, and makes this giant, commemorating temple, if you want to call it that. That's why that exists. That's when Spike tells the doctor, he's just like, we actually came to find you not because of this baby, but because my mom, she is having all these sickness waves, she's having these issues and whatnot, so I want you to check her out. So he ends up checking her out, and he doesn't give her an exact prognosis because obviously we're in primitive times, so he doesn't really have tools and whatnot, but he essentially implies that she more than likely has cancer, and it's going to, unalive her very soon. After that, there is an emotional sequence that I personally found very funny and cringe, but the doctor ends up putting the mother down by her own free will so she doesn't have to suffer anymore, and that's when he burns her, gives the skull to the son, so that way he can climb to the very top of this temple and put her skull at the very top like a Christmas tree, and it's supposed to be sentimental. I personally found it very cringe. And that's when the doctor's just like, hey, I know you came all this way with your mother in hopes that I can cure her or something like that, and instead I turned her into a Christmas ornament, but you and that baby have to go now. So they do. Now, a little bit of time passes, not a lot, but Spike ends up putting the baby in this little basket with a little letter explaining everything, what happened and whatnot, and sends the baby on the ocean waves back to the village. I don't know how it made it there either, but, it makes it back to the village. His dad ends up opening the letter, and you get a little voiceover from Spike, and it implies that he's going to stay on that mainland for a little bit. He's going to discover himself maybe a little bit as a 12-year-old, and you just get to see him kind of cooking this little fish that he caught, and then he gets, out of nowhere, he gets chased by a bunch of infected, and he starts running down this jagged, railway. Now, this is practically the ending, but this is when Spike runs into a giant rock wall. He's cornered, and he's got all these infected coming at him, and out of nowhere, at the top of this little rock quarry, there's this guy with a tracksuit on, gold chains and a blonde wig, and he says, hey, my name's Jimmy. Can I help you? So Spike accepts, and that's when Jimmy unleashes like 10 other Jimmys that look exactly like him. They're all dressed in tracksuits, gold chain, blonde wigs, and they start unaliving the infected, but they do it in a way where it's just kind of like manipulative and kind of shitty. They're not just like instantly doing it. At this point, they actually take one of the infected and, hang them upside down like we seen that one guy from the very beginning. After they all save the day, that's when Jimmy, the leader, goes up to Spike and he's just like, hey, why don't you join us? And then the movie ends. I did a little bit of research after the fact, and I guess they based Jimmy's look off of this UK British, television personality from the 80s or 90s by the name of Jimmy Sav, who was just like this outlandish guy. But after his death, he was found to be potentially guilty of a lot of really heinous and not good things. And it's just really kind of wild to think about they based the character off of them, but whatever. Obviously speaking, the dad Jamie, when he was talking to Spike in that dilapidated building when they were hiding from the infected, and he explained to Spike that, there are worse things than infected on this island, I'm going to go on a limb and say he was probably talking about people like Jimmy. My speculation going into the next movie, The Bone Temple, coming out in January, is that we're going to explore more of the Jimmys and their community and how, what kind of role Spike is going to play with them. And then we're also going to follow Jamie, Aaron Taylor Johnson, as he goes and tries to look for him. And I'm assuming when you have the star power of Ralph Fiennes and you name the movie The Bone Temple, I'm going to assume he's probably going to play a little bit of a pivotal role in the next movie as well. And I think a giant part of the runtime, I'm assuming the next movie is going to be about 2 hours too, is that we're not really going to focus on the infected whatsoever, and we're really going to focus on Jamie trying to track down this community and get his son back. But I also think that baby arriving in that village is going to divide the townspeople in half. You got half of the people that want that baby out because they're scared they're going to get infected by it, and the other half is just wanting to keep it and harbor its genetics to potentially find a cure. But overall, what do you guys think about 28 years later, and where do you think everything is going to lead going into the next movie? Leave your comments down below and let me know, and I will see you in the next video. Bye.